The execution of Queen Serathix's exile was a spectacle designed to send a message. Once the unyielding ruler of the Vortex Dominion, her name was synonymous with fear across countless star systems. Her vast empire had thrived under her iron-fisted rule for centuries, but her reign had come to a sudden and brutal end. Allied planets, united by shared grievances and forged alliances, had overthrown her in a sweeping coup. Her armies were dismantled, her loyalists hunted, and her once unstoppable fleets were reduced to glowing wreckage in orbit. Her final punishment was not death, a mercy, she thought, but something worse: banishment. Fregoria, the coldest and most desolate planet in known space, was her prison. It was a frozen wasteland with temperatures so low that survival was nearly impossible. The galaxy called it the Silent Graveyard, a place where no one lasted long enough to be remembered. The shuttle carrying Serathix broke through the planet's hostile atmosphere. The icy winds howled, battering the vessel as it descended. The guards, faceless and armored in thermal suits, dragged her from the hold. She no longer wore the regalia of her reign, just a tattered cloak that did little to shield her from the bitter cold. "You are no longer a queen," one guard sneered as they shoved her forward. "You're nothing now." Serathix didn't reply. Her back straightened against the wind, and her eyes, once described as molten gold, burned with quiet defiance. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The guards left her in a crude shelter, a rusted metal dome with failing life support and just enough rations to extend her suffering. As they lifted off, the roaring engines of their ship faded into the endless blizzard, leaving her alone in the silence. Inside the shelter, Serathix surveyed her surroundings. The space was barely larger than a storage room, with a malfunctioning heater and a single cot bolted to the floor. Her fingers, already numb, traced the edges of an old emergency beacon built into the wall. A laugh escaped her lips, sharp and bitter. "A beacon? What mockery is this? Do they expect me to cry for help? No one will answer?" But as the days dragged into nights and the bitter cold seeped deeper into her bones, Serathix's laughter turned to silence. Alone in the unyielding frost, her defiance began to waver. The once mighty queen, who had never begged for anything in her life, pressed the beacon's activation button. "If there is anyone left in this forsaken galaxy, with courage enough to hear me," she whispered to the frigid air, "know that Queen Serathix lives, and that I will not die forgotten." Light years away, aboard the sleek medical frigate Nomad, Eli Banner lounged in the cockpit sipping a cup of lukewarm synth coffee. A rogue medic with a reputation for going where others feared to tread, Eli had made a career of helping the galaxy's forgotten: refugees, survivors of war, and anyone abandoned by bureaucracy. The Nomad's AI, Artemis, chimed in, interrupting his moment of peace. "Incoming distress signal, Doctor. Low priority classification. Source, Fregoria." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Fregoria? Isn't that where they send people to die?" "Correct," Artemis replied. "The signal appears to be an ancient emergency beacon. Probability of a living sender is less than 10%. Eli frowned, setting his coffee aside. "A 10% chance is better than 0. Let's take a look." The beacon's message crackled through the speakers, garbled by interference, but still clear enough to send a chill down his spine. "This is Serathix. I will not die forgotten." Eli sat back, his mind racing. Serathix. Even in the most distant corners of the galaxy, her name was infamous. The Tyrant Queen whose reign had ended in flames. If she was alive and calling for help, there was no telling what chaos might follow. "Doctor," Artemis said, her voice calm but pointed, "this is likely a trap. The risks outweigh the benefits." Eli shook his head. "You know me, Artemis. I can't ignore this. Plot a course to Fregoria. Let's see if there's still someone left to save." Artemis hesitated before replying. "Course plotted. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. Prepare for sub-zero landing conditions." As the Nomad streaked through hyperspace, Eli prepared for what he might find. He packed his medkit with everything he could carry: thermal wraps, regenerative serums, and emergency rations. Part of him hoped this was just a wild goose chase, that Serathix was long dead, and the signal was a relic of her fall. But deep down, he knew better. The galaxy had a way of holding on to its most dangerous stories. The Nomad broke through the atmosphere of Fregoria with a shudder, its hull groaning under the assault of the planet's bitter winds. The cockpit window displayed a barren expanse of jagged ice and swirling snow, the desolation amplified by the eerie light of Fragoria's twin moons. Landing site identified, Artemis, the ship's AI, announced. Proximity to the distress signal is within 200 meters. Conditions are hazardous. Temperature, minus 170 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds 120 kilometers per hour. Perfect, Dr. Eli Banner muttered as he adjusted the Nomad stabilizers. Just another day in paradise. The ship touched down with a heavy thud, its landing struts sinking slightly into the snow-packed ice. Eli activated his thermal suit, pulling on insulated gloves and a mask that regulated his breathing in the thin, frigid atmosphere. He grabbed his med kit and slung it over his shoulder, bracing himself for what awaited outside. "Stay warm, Artemis," he quipped. "I'll try not to freeze solid out there." The ship's airlock hissed open, and a blast of icy wind nearly knocked him backward. He stepped out into the storm, the howl of the wind drowning out all other sounds. Snow swirled in blinding patterns, forcing him to rely on his handheld scanner to navigate toward the source of the distress signal. The wreckage came into view, a jagged silhouette against the whiteout. The remains of a small shelter were half buried in ice, its structure battered by years of relentless storms. The distress beacon's faint pulse emanated from within, its light barely visible through the snow. Eli pushed through the knee-deep drifts, his breath fogging the inside of his mask. He reached the shelter and forced the frozen door open, the metal groaning in protest. Inside, the temperature was marginally warmer, but still brutal. The dim light from the beacon revealed the frail figure of Queen Serathix, slumped against the wall. She was barely recognizable as the once feared ruler of the Vortex Dominion. Her silver hair was matted with frost, her regal features hollowed by starvation and cold. Yet as Eli approached, her golden eyes flickered open, still burning with a defiance that refused to die. "Who dares?" she rasped, her voice a mere whisper. "I'm Dr. Eli Banner," he said, kneeling beside her. "And I'm here to save your life." Serathix's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "A human, a medic, no less. Have I fallen so low?" "Looks like it," Eli replied, his tone steady as he pulled out a thermal blanket and wrapped it around her shivering form. "But let's focus on getting you warm first. We can argue about your pride later." Serathix's condition was worse than Eli had anticipated. Her extremities showed signs of frostbite, her breathing was shallow and her pulse was faint. He administered a dose of a regenerative serum and began rubbing warmth back into her hands and feet. "Why, save me," she murmured, her voice shaking. "The galaxy hates me. Perhaps you should too." Eli met her gaze, his expression firm. "I'm not here to pass judgment. I'm here because you're alive, and that's enough reason for me." For a moment, Serathix said nothing, her golden eyes searching his face. Then she closed them, her exhaustion overtaking her as the serum began to take effect. Eli worked quickly to stabilize her, preparing her for transport. He hoisted her onto a stretcher, her frail body lighter than he had expected. As he carried her through the storm back to the Nomad, the wind howled louder, as if protesting her rescue. "Hold on," Eli muttered, his breath visible in the freezing air. "You're not dying here. Not today." The warmth of the Nomad's med bay was a stark contrast to the frigid wasteland Eli had just left behind. He secured Serathix on the central bed, connecting her to monitors that displayed her unstable vitals. The regenerative serum was working, but the damage from her prolonged exposure to the cold was extensive. Eli removed his thermal suit, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. He set to work, applying heated wraps to Serathix's limbs and adjusting the medbay's temperature to accelerate her recovery. As he worked, the ship's comm system crackled to life. "Doctor," Artemis said, her tone laced with urgency. "Unidentified vessels detected in orbit. Scans indicate they are SciFi's patrol ships." Eli cursed under his breath. "Let me guess. They're not here to roll out the welcome mat." "Unlikely," Artemis replied. "They appear to be searching for a signal. Probability of them detecting the Nomad is increasing." Eli turned to Serathix, who was beginning to stir. Her golden eyes opened slightly, and she took in her surroundings with a mixture of confusion and recognition. "You brought me back," she said weakly. "Foolish human." "Yeah, well, foolishness is kind of my specialty," Eli replied, moving to the cockpit. "Now we've got company, and I need to get us out of here before they decide to finish what they started." The Nomad's engines roared to life, lifting the ship off Fragoria's surface. Eli navigated the ascent with precision, weaving through the planet's turbulent atmosphere. On the radar, the cephalic ships closed in, their weapons systems lighting up. "Incoming fire," Artemis warned. "Evasive maneuvers recommended." Eli gripped the controls, his jaw tightening as plasma bolts streaked past the ship. "I'm open to recommendations, Artemis, but I'd really prefer a miracle right now." In the med bay, Serathix watched the chaos unfold on the monitor, her mind racing despite her weakened state. Her time as a ruler had taught her to read battle situations instinctively, and she saw an opening. "Doctor," she called, her voice regaining some of its former authority. "Listen to me. Use the storm. Their systems will falter in the interference." Eli hesitated, glancing at the storm still swirling over Fragoria. "That's a gamble." "Trust me," Serathix said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If you don't, we're already dead." Eli steered the Nomad back into the storm, the turbulence rattling the ship as visibility dropped to near zero. The pursuing ships hesitated, their more advanced systems struggling to compensate for the extreme conditions. "Now, Doctor," Serathix said, her golden eyes gleaming. "Use their hesitation. Strike back." Eli activated the ship's rear weapons, firing a precise volley that struck one of the patrol ships, sending it spiraling into the storm. The remaining ships broke off their pursuit, retreating to safer altitudes. "That was impressive," Eli admitted, his voice tinged with awe. Serathix managed a faint smile, her strength fading once more. "A queen never forgets how to command." As the Nomad broke free from the storm and entered hyperspace, Eli let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. In the med bay, Serathix drifted into a deep sleep, her body finally able to begin its recovery. Eli sat beside her, his mind racing with questions. Who would send patrol ships to a frozen graveyard? And what kind of danger had he just invited aboard his ship? "One thing's for sure," he muttered, glancing at the sleeping queen. "This is only the beginning." The Nomad's medbay hummed softly with the sound of machinery monitoring Queen Serathix's vitals. Her once fragile pulse was strengthening, her breathing steadying as Dr. Eli Banner worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. Though her frostbite and malnutrition remained serious, the queen was now out of immediate danger. Eli sat by her bedside, scanning her vitals on a tablet. His thoughts churned as he studied the data. Saving her had been the easy part. Keeping her alive while navigating a galaxy that wanted her dead was going to be the real challenge. Her exile wasn't just a punishment, it was a message to anyone who dared cross the galaxy's allied powers. To rescue her was to challenge that authority. As if sensing his unease, Serathix stirred, her golden eyes fluttering open. Despite her weakened state, her gaze carried the same commanding presence that had once ruled an empire. "You look troubled, Doctor," she said, her voice raspy but steady. "Second thoughts about your heroic act?" Eli smirked, leaning back in his chair. "More like third and fourth. Saving you wasn't exactly on my to-do list." "And yet here I am," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Tell me, why risk your life for someone like me? The galaxy has no love for tyrants." Eli met her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "I don't save people based on their popularity ratings. You were dying, and I had the means to help. That's all the reason I needed." Serathix studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Compassion, an odd trait for a human, especially one who seems to live on the edge of the law. Eli shrugged, not denying her assessment. "Compassion doesn't mean I'm blind to your history. I know who you are, or were, but everyone deserves a second chance." "A second chance," she repeated, her voice laced with bitterness. "Do you think the galaxy will grant me one? They'd rather see me rot on Fragoria." "Maybe," Eli admitted. "But that doesn't mean you have to let them win." Over the next few days, Serathix's recovery progressed steadily under Eli's care. She began to regain her strength, though her body remained fragile from the years of abuse it had endured. Eli marveled at her resilience. Despite her frailty, she carried herself with the poise of a queen. In return, Serathix shared stories of her reign, tales of conquest, betrayal, and the impossible choices she had made to maintain power. Though she did not shy away from admitting her ruthlessness, there was a thread of regret woven through her words. "My empire was built on strength," she said one evening as they shared a quiet meal in the medbay. "But strength without compassion breeds rebellion. I see that now, though far too late. Maybe not too late, Eli replied, his tone cautious. If you're willing to change, there's still time to rewrite your legacy. She arched an eyebrow, a flicker of her old arrogance returning. You think a human medic can teach me humility? Eli grinned. I think anyone can change if they want to, even a queen. As Serathix recovered, the galaxy outside the Nomad was anything but quiet. News of her survival had begun to spread, despite Eli's best efforts to keep their presence under the radar. The Scythelix patrol ships that had chased them on Fergoria were only the beginning. Incoming transmission, Artemis announced one morning as Eli prepared Serathix's next treatment. Origin, Coalition Outpost Delta 7. Encryption level, high. Eli frowned, setting aside his tools. Patch it through. The holographic display lit up, revealing the face of Commander Ulrich Vane, a high-ranking official in the Coalition's peacekeeping force. His expression was severe, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Serathix in the background. Dr. Banner, Vane began, his tone cold. You're harboring a fugitive of the highest order. Turn her over immediately, and the Coalition will consider leniency for your actions. Eli crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Leniency for saving someone's life? That's generous. Do not play games, Doctor, Vane snapped. Queen Serathix's exile was sanctioned by the United Allied Planets. Harboring her is an act of treason. Eli glanced at Serathix, who met his gaze with an unflinching expression. I didn't rescue her to hand her over to die, Eli said firmly. If you want her, you'll have to come through me. Vane's expression darkened. You've made a grave mistake, Doctor. The Coalition will not tolerate your defiance. The transmission cut off, leaving the room in tense silence. Serathix spoke first, her voice steady. You've put yourself in great danger for my sake. The Coalition won't stop until they've silenced us both. Eli nodded, already moving to the cockpit. I've dealt with bullies before. Let's see if they can keep up. As the Nomad broke out of its quiet orbit, a trio of Coalition ships appeared on the radar, closing in fast. Serathix joined Eli in the cockpit, her presence commanding despite her weakened state. They'll try to disable us first, she said, her tone sharp. But their tactics rely on predictability. If we can outmaneuver them, we might escape. Eli glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. You sound like you've done this before. I've commanded fleets, Doctor, she replied dryly. This is hardly my first pursuit. The chase was intense. The Nomad darted through asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies, its engines pushed to their limits. Serathix's strategic advice proved invaluable, her knowledge of Coalition tactics allowing them to stay one step ahead. Incoming fire, Artemis warned as plasma bolts streaked past the ship. The Nomad shuddered under the impact, its shields holding but barely. Time for a bold move, Eli muttered, steering the ship toward a dense nebula. The swirling gases interfered with sensors, creating a perfect hiding spot. As the Coalition ships entered the nebula, their pursuit slowed, their systems struggling to maintain accuracy. Now, Serathix said, her eyes blazing with determination, cut engines and let the nebula's currents carry us. Eli hesitated for only a moment before complying. The Nomad drifted silently through the nebula, its heat signature masked by the surrounding gases. The Coalition ships passed by, their scanners failing to detect the hidden vessel. When the danger had passed, Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You're good at this, he said, glancing at Serathix. I was a queen, she replied, her voice tinged with pride. I learned to survive. And now you've got a chance to do more than that, Eli said, his tone hopeful. If we're going to keep outrunning them, we need a plan, and I think you're the one to help me make it. Serathix smiled faintly, her golden eyes gleaming. Perhaps redemption isn't so far-fetched after all. The Nomad drifted in the shadow of a vast asteroid, hidden from view as Dr. Eli Banner and Queen Serathix reviewed their next move. The Coalition had intensified its search, broadcasting wanted notices for the fugitive queen and the rogue medic across multiple systems. The galaxy was watching, and time was running out. In the cockpit, Serathix sat upright, despite her lingering weakness. Her posture remained regal, her golden eyes sharp as they scanned the holographic map of nearby systems. If we keep running, they'll wear us down, Eli said, breaking the silence. We need to take the fight to them. Or at least distract them long enough to get the upper hand. Serathix nodded thoughtfully, her fingers brushing her chin. You're correct, but running isn't the only way to stay ahead. The galaxy thrives on information. We must turn their weapon against them. Eli frowned. You mean... leak something? Precisely, Serathix replied, her voice steady. The Coalition has painted me as a tyrant beyond redemption, a danger to peace, but the truth is more complex. My exile wasn't just about my past, it was about silencing me before I revealed their hypocrisy. Eli's curiosity piqued. What are you talking about? Serathix's gaze hardened. The allied planets that overthrew me built their power on the very tactics they accused me of using. Oppression, exploitation, secrecy. I have the records to prove it, hidden in the memory banks of one of my old fortresses on Tysari 4. Tysari 4, Eli repeated, pulling up the star chart. The planet was an unassuming world on the edge of Sithalic space, its designation marked as abandoned. And you think those records are still there? They are, she said firmly. My enemies were thorough in dismantling my empire, but they underestimated the depth of my foresight. If we can retrieve those records, we can expose them and shift the galaxy's perception in our favor. Eli leaned back in his seat, a small grin tugging at his lips. You really are full of surprises. Survival demands it, she replied with a faint smirk. But reaching Tysari 4 will not be easy. The Coalition knows its significance. They'll have patrols. Good thing I specialize in doing what's not easy, Eli said, already plotting the course. Let's get to work. The journey to Tysari 4 was fraught with tension. The Nomad maneuvered through backwater systems and avoided heavily trafficked trade routes to stay off Coalition radar. Along the way, Eli and Serathix worked tirelessly to refine their plan. Serathix, despite her recovery, insisted on taking an active role. She reviewed old star charts, identifying potential entry points to Tysari 4, while training Eli in the political nuances of galactic diplomacy. You may be a skilled medic, she said one evening as they pored over a tactical map, but you must learn to think like a strategist. Winning battles is only part of the game. Winning hearts and minds is what ensures lasting victory. Sounds like something you've done before, Eli remarked, scribbling notes on a datapad. She met his gaze, her expression tinged with a mix of pride and regret. I ruled through fear, not love. I do not intend to repeat that mistake. Tysari 4 loomed ahead, its surface covered in jagged mountains and dense forests shrouded in perpetual mist. The Nomad approached cautiously, its stealth systems engaged as it descended toward the planet's northern hemisphere. Serathix guided Eli to an isolated canyon where her hidden fortress was concealed beneath layers of rock and vegetation. As the ship touched down, the ancient structure came into view, a monolithic tower carved into the mountainside, its design both elegant and imposing. This is it, Serathix said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. My last sanctuary. Eli grabbed his medkit and weapon as they disembarked, the air cold and damp around them. The fortress's entrance was sealed, its mechanisms long dormant. Serathix approached the control panel, her fingers brushing over the symbols engraved in the stone. Do you think it'll still open? Eli asked. Serathix smirked faintly. I designed it myself. It will open. She entered a series of commands, and with a low rumble, the massive doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched deep into the mountain. The air inside was stale but breathable, the faint hum of ancient power systems echoing through the halls. Eli followed her cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The fortress was a labyrinth of chambers and corridors, each adorned with relics of Serathix's reign. Ornate statues, banners bearing her sigil, and rows of dormant servers hinted at the scale of her former empire. This place is incredible, Eli said, marveling at the architecture. You built all this? My empire was built on strength and precision, she replied. But even the strongest fortress cannot withstand betrayal. They reached the central chamber, where a massive server core dominated the room. Serathix approached the console, her movements deliberate as she activated the system. The ancient machinery whirred to life, its screens flickering as lines of data began to scroll. Everything we need is here, she said, her golden eyes gleaming. Evidence of their corruption, their manipulations, their lies. Eli glanced at the data, his expression darkening as he read. This is damning. If we can get this out to the galaxy, it'll turn everything on its head. Precisely, Serathix said. But it must be done carefully. The coalition will stop at nothing to prevent this from being broadcast. Their moment of triumph was interrupted by a distant rumble. Eli's stomach sank as Artemis's voice crackled through his comm device. Dr. Banner, hostile ships have entered the atmosphere. Coalition forces detected. Estimated time to arrival, 10 minutes. They must have followed us, Eli muttered, his mind racing. We need to get this data out now. Serathix worked quickly, transferring the files to a portable drive. Take this, she said, handing it to Eli. Get it to your ship. I'll hold them off. Eli stared at her, his eyes narrowing. You're in no condition to fight. I am still a queen, she replied, her voice steel, and I will not run while my enemies destroy what remains of my legacy. Eli hesitated but saw the fire in her eyes. All right, he said, gripping the drive tightly. But don't do anything stupid. She smirked faintly. Stupidity is your domain, Doctor. As Eli sprinted back to the Nomad, Serathix activated the fortress's ancient defenses. Turrets emerged from hidden alcoves, their targeting systems locking onto the approaching coalition forces. The air filled with the sound of battle as plasma bolts lit up the misty canyon. Serathix stood at the heart of the fortress, her golden eyes blazing as she commanded the defenses. For the first time in years, she felt the thrill of battle, not as a tyrant, but as a protector. In the distance, the Nomad's engines roared to life, carrying Eli and the data to safety. Serathix watched it ascend, a sense of calm washing over her despite the chaos around her. Go, Doctor, she whispered. Change the galaxy. Her stand had only just begun. The Nomad climbed through the misty atmosphere of Tisari 4, its engines straining against gravity. Inside the cockpit, Dr. Eli Banner gripped the controls, his knuckles white as coalition fighters began to close in on his position. Artemis, status report, he barked. 3 coalition ships detected in pursuit, the AI replied. Probability of evasion, 37%. Eli cursed under his breath. That's not exactly comforting. Back on the surface, Queen Serathix stood amidst the fortress's control room, her golden eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the battlefield outside. The ancient turrets she had reactivated fired relentlessly, but the coalition forces were overwhelming. Her defenses, powerful as they were, would not hold indefinitely. The comm device in her hand crackled to life. Serathix, Eli's voice came through, tense but steady. I'm out of the atmosphere, but they're all over me. I can't make the jump to hyperspace with them this close. Then I will ensure they don't follow, she replied, her voice calm despite the danger. You can't fight them all, Eli protested. Come with me, there's still time. Serathix smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. A queen does not flee, Doctor. My time as a ruler may be over, but my duty is not. Go. Deliver the truth to the galaxy. That is how we win. The transmission cut off before Eli could argue further. Serathix turned her attention back to the fortress's defenses. The turrets continued to fire, but the coalition forces were adapting, targeting the power nodes hidden throughout the canyon. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. The fortress had one final contingency, a self-destruct mechanism capable of unleashing a powerful electromagnetic pulse. It seems my legacy will end here, she murmured to herself, her expression resolute. Activating the fortress's central console, she began the sequence to overload its core. The countdown timer appeared on the screen. 5 minutes. Outside, the coalition forces pushed closer, their fighters strafing the fortress and firing at the remaining turrets. Serathix stood at the central console, issuing commands with precision. The EMP would cripple the coalition systems long enough for Eli to escape, but it would also destroy the fortress, and her along with it. She closed her eyes briefly, memories flashing through her mind. Her rise to power, the countless battles fought, the betrayals that led to her fall. And now, a human medic risking everything to save her. It was an irony she couldn't ignore. Perhaps, she whispered, redemption lies not in survival, but in sacrifice. High above Tisari 4, the Nomad zigzagged through enemy fire, its shields flickering dangerously. Eli gritted his teeth, his hands flying over the controls as the coalition fighters closed in. Artemis, we need options, he said, his voice tight. The Queen's fortress is emitting a high-energy buildup, the AI replied. It appears she has activated a self-destruct sequence. Eli's heart sank. No, she wouldn't. She has, Artemis confirmed. Projected detonation in 2 minutes. The resulting EMP will disable all nearby vessels. Eli hesitated, his mind racing. He couldn't abandon her, not after everything they had fought for. But if he stayed, the data they had retrieved would be lost, and with it, any chance of exposing the Coalition's corruption. Your priority is survival, Doctor, Artemis added. She knew this. Eli clenched his fists, his chest tightening. Damn it, Serathix. On the surface, the countdown neared its end. Serathix stood at the heart of the fortress, her posture straight and regal. The Coalition forces had breached the outer defenses, their soldiers pouring into the canyon. She activated the final sequence, the hum of the fortress's core rising to a deafening crescendo. "Let the galaxy see the truth," she said softly, her voice filled with both sorrow and resolve. The EMP detonated with a brilliant flash, a wave of energy radiating out from the fortress. Coalition ships and ground forces alike were caught in the blast, their systems shutting down instantly. The fighters pursuing the Nomad veered off course, their engines sputtering as they drifted aimlessly. Eli watched from the cockpit, his heart heavy. The display showed the fortress reduced to rubble, its light extinguished. "Artemis," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Are we clear?" "Clear, Doctor," the AI replied. "The Coalition forces have been neutralized." Eli took a shaky breath, gripping the controls tightly. "Then let's finish what we started." The Nomad jumped to hyperspace, carrying the encrypted data drive to its destination. Eli's journey took him to a forest station, a neutral hub known for its robust communication networks. There, he transmitted the files to every major news outlet and galactic forum. The revelations were explosive. Evidence of the Coalition's corruption, their exploitation of weaker planets, and their role in orchestrating Serathix's exile spread like wildfire. Public outrage grew, and calls for accountability echoed across the galaxy. Weeks later, Eli sat alone in the Nomad's cockpit, staring out at the stars. The galaxy had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The Coalition was on the defensive, their power diminished by the truth. And Serathix, the queen he had saved, had become a symbol, not of tyranny, but of redemption. "You did it," he murmured to the empty room. "You turned the tide." Though her loss weighed heavily on him, Eli found solace in the knowledge that her sacrifice had mattered. Serathix's legacy was no longer one of fear, but of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible.